And for those who find themselves uncomfortable at even thinking about challenging even one potential orthodoxy, well, that's usually a time to try even harder to keep an open mind. I guess alternatively, you could just watch Tucker Carlson in a fetal ball, but who wants to do that? We're not doing a version of that. And if this new conservatism involves conservatives and Republicans living a bit more like liberals, less church, less religious dogma guiding their choices and priorities, then why does the left and right seem more polarized than ever? And why, big question, is the Supreme Court still on the precipice of making Scripture the law of the land to regulate and oppress women? All right, that's a lot. And as I mentioned, it draws on that piece. And to explore the answer, we have the author of that New York Times essay about the decline of the religious right, Nate Hochman, who's here. His first time on the beat, a fellow at the Conservative National Review, joined by Obama campaign veteran and political history expert, Che Komanduri. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Good to be here, all right.
Absolutely. So we'll talk it all out, which we like to do on the beat. Nate, the piece was very interesting. People are reacting to it a lot, which I think is a credit to at least the way you wrote it or some of what you excavated. I posed some questions there, so the floor is yours to introduce yourself and answer.
Right. So thanks for having me on. First of all, the premise of the piece was basically that it's no secret to anyone who's been paying attention to religion and American culture in the past couple of decades that America is secularizing. Rapidly, we are seeing fewer and fewer people go to church in really precipitous declines over the course of the last couple of decades. But one thing that really hasn't been paid as much attention to over the last decade or so is the fact that this is not just happening on the left, it's happening on the right as well. The decline in American religion began in sort of liberal Protestant mainstream denominations, but it has actually expanded to a lot of conservative evangelical denominations too. So the Republican Party today is more secular and less religious than it has been in a generation or two at the very least. And that's going to have a substantive effect on the politics of the GOP and of conservatism. So I was trying to wrestle really with what does a secular, quote unquote, post-Christian conservatism look like? It's going to be more amenable to issues like gay marriage, for example, but it's also going to focus on other culture war issues that are broadly appealing to a much more secular voter base. And I think that's kind of the realignment that you're seeing today.
Che?
Well, I'm not so sure that it's going to be more amenable to gay marriage. I mean, if you look at Ron DeSantis, what the Texas GOP recently did, basically taking a very strong line against homosexuality, I don't necessarily think that that is true. I do agree with Nate that religion has definitely declined in America. I don't think there's any question about that. And I do think that one of the reasons for Trump was that decline. As people stopped identifying as Christians, they started identifying more by race and gender. Specifically for Trump voters, their white identity and their male identity came much more to the forefront. I think that there is a sort of a false belief among a lot of intellectuals that as people become less religious, they're going to turn towards secular humanism. History has shown us that that is not true. However, I do think that this new sort of Trumpist right has all of the negatives of the old religious right. It is full of hypocrisy, selective outrage, and it really has this materialist sort of obsession with power that is really at odds with spirituality. So I think the same way that the old religious right was bad for politics and bad for religion, I think that's going to be very much true for the new Trumpist non-religious right.
Nate?
Well, 55% of Republican voters today support gay marriage. So I'm not so sure. Ron DeSantis actually hasn't said anything about opposing gay marriage. So I'm not totally sure.
Well, he did the Disney thing.
Right, but that's not an opposition to gay marriage. It has to do with debates over the role of sexual and gender instruction for young children in schools. But in terms of the sort of accusations that this is all bigotry, the Republican Party today, the Electoral Coalition, is the most racially diverse that it has been in modern history, at least since the early 1900s. If you look at Myra Flores' upset victory in South Texas just last week, she won a 80 to 90% Hispanic district that Joe Biden carried by 4 points just in 2020. So it's pretty clear to me that a lot of the politics that we're talking about today is actually more appealing to a lot of racial minorities who traditionally voted for Democrats. And I think that's something that Democrats and progressives have to recognize.
I'll jump in. I'll let Che respond to that. You are grading on a curve. I mean, if you say, oh, compared to just this post-Jim Crow era when Republicans fortified a white ruling class and it's better than that, sure, but quite a curve. You also make hold on. I'm going to finish. Hold on.
Sure.
But you also make a point that there are people being elected in a diverse coalition, so that is a real thing. What I want to also steer you to and then have Che respond to is the other controversial point you make in the piece is you position a lot of what's happening, or some of what's happening, as a response to overreach. I alluded to that in the COVID example. Reasonable people can debate these things. Just to be clear, what portion of what you're diagnosing do you think really is a response to what you call wokeism or the left? Because during the Trump era, they weren't in power federally. So it's sort of like, what is the response to? And then Che can respond to you.
Right. So I was responding to the specific claim that the decline of the religious right has supplanted sort of gender and racial grievance in place of religious observance. I think that's clearly not true if you look at the rapid racial diversification of the GOP coalition. But I think a lot of it has to do with sort of progressive overreach in our cultural institutions. The fact that progressives and Democrats weren't necessarily in power, at least for the first half of the Trump administration in Congress, doesn't change the fact that they have an enormous amount of power in a lot of our cultural institutions. And a lot of sort of more culturally conservative, not necessarily white, working and middle class voters are really uncomfortable with aspects of the post-Obama cultural progressive agenda. And that is what is driving them towards the GOP. Again, if you look at Mayra Flores, her victory in this 80 to 90% Hispanic South Texas district, she ran specifically on the border and immigration.
Okay,
she was telling those voters that Democrats have abandoned them on immigration.
As promised, let me bring Che in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yes, Trump did do a little bit better. George W. Bush did a lot more, much better in 2004, if people remember. And so you're starting from a very low bar. And I think there's a lot of other things and other factors that kind of play into that. I do think that the appeal to male identity potentially could reach across racial lines. But I also don't think that's a development that Republicans or Americans should celebrate. And as far as, your discussions about wokeism, look, one thing I'll say is religion is many things. Okay, it's a way of life, it's a philosophy, it's all those things. But one of those things that it is it is a stone to throw at people you do not like. And when people wonder why so many evangelicals supported Donald Trump said very clearly, I will throw those stones. I will throw those stones at Muslims. I'll throw those stones at Mexicans. I'll throw those stones at the media. I will throw those stones at the deep state. And I think one thing that Christians, I would urge them to think about is this something you want to be associated with? Is this the type of spirituality, this stone-throwing spirituality that you want to be associated with? I think that's a very deep question for a lot of people of faith going forward.
Well, it is deep, and it especially speaks to the enthusiasm, not just the divorce and the peace with Trump, but the enthusiasm for Trump on the right, which we've seen in those hearings about who's really going to put up with that. This brings us to one piece of sound we have when we look at some of the people you're talking about. I don't know whether these would fit into your lexicon or not, but this is real people on the right, and some of what they're saying about policy does overlap with fear of others and bigotry. Take a listen.
I don't like the things that are happening with the illegal immigrants. They're taking our jobs.
These people that are coming in are getting free handouts and everything else like that.
You think that people are living off of the state but not doing it legally?
Absolutely. And I think it's bull.
It's not my job to subsidize someone that's here illegally.
They're trying to wash out our votes.
Change our demographics.
I think it's important for us to put America and Americans first.
You both get 30 seconds, and Nate, I want to be very precise. I'm not referring to your essay, but some of what we just heard there gets closer to what Tucker does, which gets closer to replacement theory. Minorities, racial minorities, Jews, they're here in a conspiracy to destroy white Americans, Christian or not, blah, blah, blah. Not saying you say that, but where is the role in this movement that you're diagnosing to stand up and confront that if you say that is not a good part of democracy?
Well, look, I think I would caution against sort of taking the sort of anecdotes that you hear from folks when you go out and interview random people on the street and taking that and extrapolating it to describe a broader electoral trend, right? It is, as I said, clear that the GOP is on its way to being the most racially diverse coalition that has been in a century. So if you reduce all of those developments to racism and bigotry, What you're essentially saying is that all of these non-white voters who are moving into the GOP coalition actually don't know or aren't actually conscious or aware of why they're voting for
I'll let you
Republicans.
finish. You must be using poetic license, because when you said the words "you must be saying," you can't mean literally me, because I'm doing this segment to explore your ideas, but I'm also holding you accountable for the rise of replacement theory, which overlaps with immigration policy. I will let you finish,
Right,
as Kanye would say, but I hope you don't mean me.
No, it is. I'm not specifically talking about you, but this is obviously an argument that you hear from a lot of mainstream outlets or general arguments in general, which is that what is driving any aspect of GOP politics really can be reduced to bigotry and racism and sexism, et cetera. I would caution your progressive viewers to give into that framework. I think especially if Democrats actually want to be electorally viable with demographics like Latinos, for example, who are rapidly moving right, they have to take seriously the possibility that people are pro-life, for example, because they actually have a different conception of when life begins. They don't just hate women, right? They're not just bigots.
It circles
you
back
have to engage with those
earnestly
ideas.
held beliefs. I have to do the referee thing and get Che his 30 seconds. We're running over on time. Che?
Yeah, look, as when it comes to religion, there are a lot of people on the left who might cheer the demise of religion. I'm not one of them. You know, I'm somebody like Elvis Costello who would like some more peace, love, and understanding in our society and our politics.
Respect.
However, keep in mind that the religious right and the Trumpist religious right, or non-religious right, as you put it, is none of those things. It will bring none of those things to our politics. It will be bad for our politics, and it will be bad for religion.
Appreciate both of you having this conversation. We do need that. As Elvis Costello would say, we're watching the detectives, and you are both detectives for your respective political movements. I tried. We'll be right back.